Hello, my name is Joe Cartwright and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be looking at how do you fix a watercolor painting. Now, personally I don't believe every watercolor painting can be fixed or should be fixed. As a rough guide, I say to my students, if only 10% of your painting needs adjusting, then go ahead and fix it. And if it takes much more than that, then it's probably easier just to paint the painting again. Now, when we're talking about fixing a watercolor painting, there are two areas we need to be concentrating on. One has to do with the design of the painting, and the other one has to do with technique. And of the two, the design is the more important. Because if your painting doesn't have a good underlying design to it, it doesn't matter how good your technique is, your final result will still look very ordinary. Another way to look at it is that first impressions are absolutely critical, and when someone sees your painting from a distance, they're not actually going to be seeing technique, they're going to be seeing your design. And if that first impression is positive, then when they come and look at your painting, and if some of your technique isn't perfect, they may still very well continue to like your painting. I'm going to be talking about design for this video, looking at what are some of the key things you have to consider and how you can fix them. And I'll be looking at how to fix technique in my next video. What are the key things to a good design? So first thing is your painting needs to have an interesting tonal layout. It's probably easier to see what I mean by that by looking at what's a boring tonal layout. This example is where the whole painting is painted in a middle grey. It's where every part of the painting is a similar medium value. Without a clear bright white or dark dark, the painting looks flat and muddy from a distance. It's important that there's variation in the tonal pattern of your painting, otherwise it can look very boring. To see your values more clearly, try a quick pencil or one-colour sketch before you start your main painting. So that's cobalt blue for the sky. And this is raw umber and French ultramarine for the ground. And this is just some raw umber, French ultramarine and aureolin, just to mix a dull grey green. Now, what I'm doing here, because this first example is to show you what happens if you paint everything in a middle grey. It doesn't actually have to be a middle grey. This error is more where people paint everything in the same tone. So I'm mixing these colours and trying to judge equal tones. And the way you test a tone or can see a tone is by just squinting through your barely open eyes, just through your eyelashes, and that can take away a lot of the colour component and leave you with the grey tone value of your colour. So we'll start with some cobalt blue. This is quite a hard painting for me to do because my natural inclination is to put the right tones and the right things in the painting, but here I'm purposefully trying to paint with the wrong design elements. Just going to adjust the sky color because it's still a bit too bright for this exercise. That'll do it. Go dry that. Okay, now we'll paint the shed. Just going to add some burnt sienna to this cobalt blue. I'll just try that again. If you squint at this image, you'll take out the colour and just be left with the grey values of the individual colours. And you'll see it's mostly a relatively flat looking image. Now I'm going to paint this so that I have quite a wide variation in tones from the whites all the way to very dark darks. I'll begin with the cobalt blue for the sky again. You don't have to go very strong with this. In fact, that's probably a bit too strong. The sky is normally the lightest part of your painting in a scene like this. That'll do. And I'll start with some aureolin, raw umber and cobalt turquoise for the green. And I'm going to mix another green here with the same colours, but I'll also add some French ultramarine to it. And for the ground, I'll just start with some raw umber and a little bit of cobalt turquoise. This is not supposed to be a special painting. I'm just using it to show you the difference between no tonal variation and lots of tonal variation. Okay, we'll start with the cobalt blue. Just cleaning most of the brush and coming in and just adding a bit of colour to these clouds. Clean it again and then drag the last of this very weak blue down to the ground level. Now we'll paint paint the ground. And I'm letting some of that water that's beaded at the bottom of that cloud wash, letting that flow into my ground colour, and that will lighten the distant colour. As I come forward, I'll add more paint. I'll add a little bit of burnt sienna as well. So now the tone is increasing. And I'm leaving a few little untouched areas, just glitter. And then I'll get some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. Thicker mix. And we're going to just paint some splatter. Effectively adding even more tonal variation to the subject. Go and dry that. Let's put the trees in now. I'll begin with my lightest tone. Then I'll go into this darker tone. Paint a few branches, trunks. Throw in maybe a fence line. For the shed, I'm going to mix a grey colour with some cobalt blue, a little bit of burnt sienna. Let me go dry that. put in some sort of doorway. And we'll assume there's light coming from this side, so this wall here will be lighter than this one here. Be a little shadow under the eaves. And there'll be a cast shadow cast by the shed. Underneath these eaves it'll be just a little bit darker still. As I said, this is just a very quick sketch, not meant to be any great masterpiece, but you can see how much more vibrant and alive and interesting this example is relative to this example, where it's somewhat a flat painting, and this one has a lot more tonal variation, making it much more interesting. In this example, I'm going to have a sky with small white clouds evenly spaced and all about the same size, and some trees that are also about the same size. Then here I'll show you a more interesting composition that I can create by varying the size and shape of some of these clouds and trees. So I'll just mix some cobalt blue, green for the trees, and a light brown green colour for the ground. That'll do. This is just a very simple example. Just using some aureolin, raw umber, a little bit of cobalt turquoise, and some French ultramarine. And I'm mixing a dark green here. And for the ground, I'll just begin with some raw umber. A tiny bit of cobalt turquoise. I'm going to start by creating some clouds, and I'm creating the clouds by painting the sky around the clouds. Then for the ground, I'll just use this colour here. Again, these aren't meant to be full paintings. It's just an exercise to show you an element of design. Let me dry that. Now I'll paint the trees. You can see from this example how the eye is forced to jump from one shape to another, whether it be the light shapes or the dark shapes. So it can appear a bit confusing. It's also a very boring shape because everything is regular. Even the trees, while they're darker, they're very similar in size to the cloud shapes. Now let me show you what I can do with that scene to make it more interesting. The first thing I'm going to do is vary the size and positioning of the clouds. I'm going to have a big cloud here, a smaller one a little bit to the side, and then a medium-sized cloud. Maybe a smaller one there and a medium-sized cloud there. Just lighten that mixture and paint the bottom of the clouds. I'll run some clean water up here just to give these clouds a bit of form, and I'll just soften that edge there just to hint at a connection. We'll go ahead and paint the ground. Okay, let's go dry this. Now I'm going to put in the trees. What I'm going to do in this case is make sure that I vary the height of the trees, and I also vary the spacing between the trees. So I'll start with a big one here. I'll put a smaller tree here. Maybe make one a bit bigger. I'm not including shadows and things like that. Hopefully you can see now how when you paint your painting you want to avoid regular shapes of the same size and tone with the same spacing, and create variety of shapes, whether it be in size or tone or positioning, so that the eye doesn't have to make lots and lots of little jumps to move around your painting. If you have a landscape where the sky is exactly the same tonal weight and size as the ground, they fight each other for attention. Your composition lacks a focal point because the proportions are too predictable. So if we'll just mix some cobalt blue for the sky and some raw umber for the ground. Okay, so in this case, if we start with a cobalt blue wash, a graded wash, so as we move down the paper, we dilute it. That. I'll go to dry this now. And now we'll paint the ground. Now again, the ground will be lighter in tone in the distance, just like the sky was lighter in tone in the distance. Then as we come forward, it'll get stronger in tone. So if you were to look at this as your landscape, we've already painted the sky and we've painted the ground. Problem with this one is the message is a bit unclear. Is it a painting about the ground or is it a painting about the sky? Now if we look at this painting here, begin with the cobalt blue sky. Then I'll start lightening it. Just lighten that some more. The sky would normally be lighter than the ground. So the ground will still be lighter in the distance and stronger in tone in the foreground. However, in this instance, the sky is definitely the hero of this painting. So this is just a simple explanation of something to keep in mind when you're creating a landscape. Make sure you don't cut the painting in half by having the horizon directly in the middle of the paper. This is common when students are afraid to use enough pigment. When they first start, they buy small tubes, they look at the cost, and they try to make the paint last as much as possible, so they use a lot more water than they should be. If the whole painting is very pale and light, it will lose that first impression impact because it lacks the contrast needed to define shapes. So I'm going to mix some colours very quickly for the sky, for the water. The water is just French ultramarine and burnt sienna for this example, and the sky is just cobalt blue. And then for the tiny hill, we'll go with burnt sienna and a small amount of French ultramarine. But I'll add a lot more water to it. And then for the ground, we'll just use some raw umber. Now in the palette, these colours look a lot stronger than what they actually are. If you look at them here, you can see in these areas just what the actual tone will be. So let's paint a sky. Leave a big cloud over here. Paint the sand. That is too weak even for this example, so I'm going to strengthen that. And then the water. And then we've got the hill. Now I'm exaggerating this a little bit just to prove a point. Now I'll paint this scene with stronger tones. We'll begin with the sky. Because this is a small shape and I've got a lot of paint in this darker mixture, I'll get rid of a lot of that. For the water, again, French ultramarine and burnt sienna, mostly French ultramarine. And I can also take advantage of the contrast between the dark water and the white foam on the waves to make the water more interesting as well. And now for the sand. Usually when you're painting a scene like this, the sky will be the lightest area, though if you have very light sand, that could be the lightest area. Obviously apart from some of the cloud shapes and some of the foam on the water. You can see how this example has a lot more life in it than that one. When you're painting with watercolors, you just have to be prepared to mix some strong colors. If you paint a painting and it's all very flat like this, you're really wasting all of your paint because this is not going to be interesting to anyone. If you'd like me to create more videos about how to fix a watercolor painting, please let me know in the comment section below, especially if you have a particular problem with one of your paintings. And also, please give this video a like, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. It helps me out a lot. And if you're able, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.